I never thought I'd be the one pouring my heart out here, but here I am, shattered beyond belief. I'm Jason, 45, and my wife, Emily, is 40. We've been married for 17 years, with 2 amazing kids. From the outside, we had the kind of life people envy. But lately, everything's taken a dark, unexpected turn. A few months ago, I started feeling exhausted all the time. I chalked it up to work stress. I'm an electrician, so long days aren't unusual. But the tiredness wasn't normal, and I noticed strange bruises that didn't heal. Finally, I dragged myself to the doctor, expecting maybe anemia or something treatable. But it wasn't that. It was terminal cancer. Stage 4. When the doctor broke the news, my mind went blank. I felt like my world just crumbled into pieces. Emily was with me during the appointment. She cried, held my hand, and told me we'd face it together, that we'd be okay. I believed her because, honestly, I needed her to be my strength when I couldn't be. But something changed almost right away. Instead of being by my side, Emily started drifting away. At first, I thought it was just her way of coping. Maybe the news hit her as hard as it hit me. I tried not to push her, thinking she needed space to process this nightmare. Little did I know, she was processing something else entirely. At first, I didn't question it. Emily was always strong, the kind of person who needed her alone time when things got tough. So when she started spending more evenings out, I assumed it was her way of coping with the weight of my diagnosis. She said she was meeting up with friends or staying late at work, and I didn't push. I was too tired, too drained from the endless doctor visits and treatments that left me weaker than I ever thought possible. But then, little things started to nag at me. The way she'd avoid eye contact when we talked about the future. The forced smiles, the distant looks. It wasn't just the usual stress of what we were going through. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself it was just part of the emotional toll of my illness. How could I blame her? We were both drowning in it. Then, I noticed her phone was always glued to her hand, notifications going off constantly. I'd never been the type to snoop, we trusted each other, but something felt off. Every time I'd ask about her day, she'd give vague answers, and when I asked if she was okay, she'd just say, "It's a lot to handle," before quickly changing the subject. I should have pushed harder, asked the uncomfortable questions. But part of me didn't want to know. I was already battling my own body, I didn't think I could handle fighting for my marriage, too. Looking back now, I wish I had listened to my gut. But I was too scared of what I might find. It all came crashing down on a Thursday afternoon. I had been feeling worse than usual, so I came home early from a checkup, hoping to rest. When I pulled up to the house, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway. My first thought was maybe it was one of Emily's friends checking in on her. I didn't think much of it. But when I walked inside, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. I called out for Emily, expecting to hear her footsteps rushing down the stairs. No answer. I wandered through the house, my heart pounding, telling myself I was overreacting. Then I heard muffled voices from the living room. That's when I saw them, Emily and my best friend, Tom, sitting on the couch. Too close. Way too close. They didn't hear me come in, too wrapped up in some hushed conversation. My stomach twisted into knots, my head spinning. I stood there, frozen, as Emily reached over and touched his hand. It was so intimate, the way she looked at him. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Before I could even process what I was seeing, Tom noticed me standing there. His face went pale, and Emily jumped up, startled, like a kid caught doing something they knew was wrong. "Jason, it's not what you think," she stammered, her voice shaky. But I could see it in her eyes, guilt, panic. My worst fear was staring me in the face. My wife and my best friend. In my home. While I was fighting for my life, they were, what? Comforting each other. That's what I wanted to believe, but deep down, I knew better. I stood there, unable to speak, my chest tightening like I couldn't breathe. Emily stepped toward me, her hands outstretched, as if she could somehow erase what I had just seen with a touch. "Jason, please, it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice trembling. But there was no conviction in her words. I turned to Tom, who was still frozen on the couch, unable to meet my eyes. My so-called best friend, the guy who had been there for me through everything, through our college days, my wedding, the birth of my kids. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. "Tom," I managed to say, though my throat felt like it was closing up, "what the hell are you doing here?" He finally looked up, his face flushed with shame. "Jason, man, he stopped, as if there was any way to explain this. "Just say it," I snapped, anger replacing the disbelief. "Tell me what's going on." Emily stepped in between us, her voice suddenly firmer, like she had decided to stop hiding. "Jason, we didn't plan this. It just happened. With everything going on, your diagnosis, how distant we've been," her voice cracked, but I didn't care. She kept talking, but all I heard was the sound of my world falling apart. My body was already weak from the cancer, but the betrayal made me feel hollow. I wanted to scream, to throw them both out, to punch Tom in the face. But I just stood there, staring at the people I trusted most, wondering how the hell this had become my life. "So that's it?" I finally said, my voice quiet but trembling with rage. "While I'm dying, you two are, what? Comforting each other? Is that what you call this?" Neither of them answered. Emily started to cry, but her tears meant nothing to me. Not anymore. Tom looked at the floor, shame radiating off him. "I need you both to get out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but the fury in it was unmistakable. "Now." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but I shot her a look that stopped her cold. "Just go," I repeated, the weight of those words crushing me. Emily stared at me, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe I was actually asking her to leave. But I couldn't look at her any longer. I turned away, feeling the ground sway beneath me like I might collapse at any moment. Tom stood up slowly, his eyes glued to the floor as if he wished he could disappear. "I'm sorry, Jason," Tom mumbled, barely audible. It didn't even matter at that point. His apology felt as empty as the air between us. Neither of them moved right away. It was like they didn't know how to walk out of the mess they had created. Emily tried to say something again, but I cut her off with just a look. I didn't have the energy for another explanation or another excuse. All I wanted was for them to leave so I could fall apart in peace. Finally, they left. The door closing behind them echoed through the house, but the silence that followed was worse. It was suffocating. I collapsed onto the nearest chair, my body weak not just from the cancer, but from the betrayal. I stared at the spot where they had sat, where Emily had held his hand like it meant something. My mind was racing, but everything was a blur. How had I not seen this coming? How long had this been going on? And why now? Of all the times in our life together, why when I was at my lowest, battling a disease that was already tearing me apart? The anger I felt earlier was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sadness. This was the woman I had spent nearly 2 decades with, the mother of my children. I thought she'd be the one by my side through it all. But now, instead of fighting for our family, she was out there with Tom, doing God knows what while I was left to pick up the pieces. I buried my face in my hands and, for the first time since my diagnosis, let myself break down. It wasn't just the cancer I was mourning. It was the life I thought we had. The house felt emptier than ever. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, my mind replaying everything over and over. It wasn't just the physical pain of my illness now, this was something deeper. How could Emily, the woman who promised to be there, in sickness and in health, choose this moment to betray me? And with Tom, my best friend of 20 years. I tried to understand how it had all unraveled. Maybe I'd been blind. I mean, how could I have missed the signs? I started questioning every conversation we had over the past few months, every time she said she was busy or working late. Every time I brushed off her coldness, thinking it was just her way of coping with my illness. God, I was such a fool. The truth is, I needed her. I needed her more than I ever had before. The treatments were draining me, and the thought of facing this fight alone was unbearable. But now, not only was I dealing with the cancer, but I was also left to carry the weight of her betrayal. I didn't know what to do with all the hurt. It felt too heavy. I thought about calling someone, my brother, my mom, anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to admit what had happened. I didn't want the pity, the questions, the inevitable, how could she do this? I couldn't even answer that myself. So I sat there, numb, unable to move, unable to even cry anymore. The tears had dried up, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. I glanced at the clock. It had been hours since they left, and I had no idea where Emily had gone. But I couldn't think about her anymore. It was too much. I needed to focus on what came next, but I had no idea what that was. Divorce? Was that even on the table when I didn't know how much time I had left? The only thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same. The life I had built, the future I thought I had, was gone. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I had the strength to rebuild. The days after that confrontation were a blur. I barely slept, and when I did, the nightmares would jolt me awake, visions of Emily and Tom together, laughing, touching. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the weight of it all pressing down on my chest. The house was too quiet, too empty. Emily didn't come back, and I didn't try to contact her. I couldn't. I didn't even know if I wanted to hear what she had to say. But I couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. It was eating me alive. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it was too much to carry alone. I needed to tell someone, even though I dreaded the words coming out of my mouth. So, I called my brother, Ryan. "Hey man, you okay?" Ryan's voice was casual at first, like he had no idea the storm that was about to hit. I hesitated. How do you even start a conversation like this? "No, I'm not," I finally said, my voice cracking. "I need to tell you something." For the next hour, I spilled everything. About the cancer, about Emily and Tom, about how I had walked into my own home and found the two people I trusted most tearing my life apart. Ryan was quiet for most of it, letting me talk, which I appreciated because I didn't have the energy to answer questions. Jesus, Jason. I don't even know what to say. His voice was thick with shock and anger. Emily. And Tom. What the hell? I don't even understand how someone could do that, especially now. Neither do I said, wiping my eyes, though I hadn't even realized I was crying. I thought we were going to face this together. I thought. I don't know. I just thought I could trust her. Ryan let out a deep sigh. You don't deserve this, man. Not after everything you've already been through. Do you want me to come over? I almost said no, but the truth was, I didn't want to be alone. I didn't trust myself alone with my thoughts anymore. Yeah, I whispered. I think I could use the company. By the time Ryan showed up, the numbness had settled back in. But seeing him there, standing in my doorway, made me feel a little less lost. We didn't need to say much. We just sat together, watching some mindless TV show while he cracked open a couple of beers, not pressuring me to talk any more than I was ready to. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was drowning. Having Ryan there helped. Just having another human being in the room made me feel like I wasn't sinking. We didn't talk much that first night, but knowing I wasn't completely alone gave me a little strength. The next morning, though, reality hit me hard again. Ryan was asleep on the couch, and I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Emily hadn't called or texted. It was like she had vanished. A part of me wanted to confront her again, to demand answers, but the other part, the exhausted, broken part, just didn't have the energy to hear her excuses. I needed a plan. Something to keep me from spiraling deeper into this black hole. So, I did what I'd been avoiding, I called a lawyer. That call was surreal. Talking about divorce when you're still processing the fact that you're dying, it felt like I was being ripped in two directions. The lawyer, Susan, was calm and professional. She walked me through the steps, talked about what to expect if I wanted to go forward with separating from Emily. But the whole time, it felt like I was on autopilot, like I was hearing someone else's life, not my own. "Do you want to file for separation or go straight to divorce?" Susan asked. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't know," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know if I can handle this right now." She was quiet for a moment. "Jason, whatever you decide, we can take it one step at a time. But you deserve to protect yourself. I know it's overwhelming, but you have to think about your future, too." The future. What a sick joke. What future did I even have? The cancer was doing a great job of making sure I didn't have much time left. But Susan was right. If Emily had done this now, I couldn't imagine what would happen if I left everything in her hands while I fought for my life. "I'll think about it," I said finally, ending the call. The thought of divorce was like salt in the wound, but I couldn't pretend anymore. My marriage was over. Ryan woke up a little while later, groggy but alert enough to notice the look on my face. "What's going on, man?" "I called a lawyer," I said, trying to sound casual, though it felt like the most unnatural thing in the world to say. I think I need to end it with Emily." He didn't look surprised. "You're doing the right thing," Ryan said, his voice low. "She's already made her choice, Jason. Now, you need to make yours." I nodded, though my mind was still a mess. It was like everything in my life was unraveling at once, and I was barely holding on. But I knew he was right. I couldn't keep clinging to the hope that this was something we could fix. Emily had broken the trust we built over 17 years. And that was something we could never come back from. A few days later, Emily finally reached out. She texted me, asking if we could talk. Part of me wanted to ignore her, let her sit in the silence and feel the weight of what she had done. But I knew it had to happen. We couldn't just pretend this wasn't real. We agreed to meet at the house. Ryan offered to be there, but I told him I needed to do this alone. I wasn't ready, but I couldn't keep putting it off. When she walked in, she looked different. Tired. Guilty. She sat down at the kitchen table across from me, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. It felt like we were strangers, two people who didn't know how to speak to each other anymore. Finally, she broke the silence. "Jason. I'm sorry." I almost laughed. The words felt so empty, so meaningless. "You're sorry?" I said, my voice cold. "What exactly are you sorry for, Emily?" "For cheating. For lying. For abandoning me when I needed you most." "Which part, exactly?" She flinched but didn't try to defend herself. "I never wanted this to happen," she said softly. "I don't even know how we got here." "How we got here?" I repeated, incredulous. "I'll tell you how we got here. I'm dying, Emily. I'm literally fighting for my life, and instead of being my wife, you're out there with Tom, doing God knows what. That's how we got here." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I didn't have any sympathy left to give. I was too tired, too angry, too broken. "Jason, I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice shaking. "It was just, everything with your diagnosis, the stress, the fear. I didn't know how to handle it." "So you ran to him?" I snapped. You ran to my best friend instead of being there for me. That's your excuse. It wasn't like that, she whispered, looking down. Tom was just there. I didn't know what to do. I felt so lost, and he. He what? I cut her off. Made you feel better? Took the pressure off. While I'm sitting here going to chemotherapy, watching my body fall apart, you're cozying up to him because it's easier than dealing with me? Her tears fell freely now, but I was numb to it. I'd seen her cry before, and I'd always been the one to comfort her, to make things right. But not this time. This time, I had nothing left to give. I'm filing for divorce, I said bluntly, the words falling from my mouth like a death sentence. Her head snapped up, her face pale. Jason, no, please, we can work through this, she pleaded, reaching across the table toward me, but I pulled away. There's nothing to work through, Emily, I said, my voice steady but hollow. You made your choice. You destroyed everything we had. She sobbed, but I just sat there, watching her crumble. A part of me hated how much this still hurt. Even after everything, I wanted to believe we could fix it. But the truth was, our marriage was dead, just like the future I had once imagined for us. I'll always care about you, I said, my voice softer now, though it took all my strength to keep it together. But I can't forgive this. I won't. She cried harder, but there was nothing more to say. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. I'll let you know when the papers are ready, I muttered, walking past her toward the door. As I left the room, the weight of finality hit me like a tidal wave. It was over. Everything was over. And as much as it hurt, I knew this was the only way forward. The house was quiet after Emily left. Too quiet. I stood in the doorway for what felt like forever, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was spinning, but I felt strangely hollow. This woman I had spent almost 2 decades with, raised kids with, built a life with, she was gone. And I was left standing there, wondering how I could possibly move forward. I thought I would feel relief, like some weight had been lifted now that I'd confronted her, now that I'd made the decision to end it. But instead, I felt more lost than ever. Sure, I'd made up my mind about the divorce, but that didn't make the pain go away. If anything, it made it sharper, more real. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I'd grow old with, it was all gone in the blink of an eye. I spent that night pacing the house, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I wondered if I had done the right thing. Maybe I should have tried harder, given her more of a chance to explain. But then the anger would come back. How could she? How could she betray me at my lowest? How could she choose my best friend, of all people? Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. My body was already weak from the cancer, but now it felt like my soul was drained too. It was like all the fight had gone out of me. The next morning, I called Ryan. I didn't need to say much, he could hear it in my voice. Within an hour, he was there, standing in my kitchen, just like before. You did it? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Yeah, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. It's done. Ryan didn't push me to talk. He just sat down next to me, cracking open a couple of beers even though it was barely noon. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. You did the right thing, you know, Ryan said after a long pause. She betrayed you. You can't come back from that. I know, I whispered, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I knew I needed to focus on what came next, filing for divorce, figuring out what to do with the house, the kids, everything. But it all felt so overwhelming. It was hard to care about the practical stuff when I was still reeling from the emotional wreckage. Ryan handed me his phone. Here, he said. I called a therapist for you. I think you need someone to talk to, someone who can help you figure this out. I wanted to protest, to tell him I didn't need therapy, but the truth was, I was drowning. I nodded, taking the number. Yeah, maybe you're right. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew the pain wasn't going away anytime soon, but having someone to talk to, someone to help me work through it all, felt like a small step in the right direction. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, something was better than nothing. After Ryan left, I sat with the therapist's number for a long time. Part of me resisted the idea, feeling like talking about it wouldn't change anything. But another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying all this pain alone, knew I had to try. So I called. The next morning, I had my first session. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it felt strangely good to talk to someone who didn't know me, didn't judge me. I told her everything, the cancer, Emily's affair, the confrontation, the divorce. She listened, asked the right questions, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I started to feel a little lighter. But just as I was starting to feel like I was getting a handle on things, life hit me again. Hard. Later that afternoon, I collapsed at home. My body was weak, much weaker than usual. I tried to brush it off, but I felt dizzy, my vision blurry. Ryan found me and insisted on taking me to the hospital, no matter how much I protested. I knew I wasn't in good shape, but I thought I had more time. I thought the treatments were working, or at least slowing things down. When the doctors started running tests, I could see the concern in their eyes, but they wouldn't say anything until they were sure. Hours passed, and I sat there, wondering what fresh hell was coming my way. I had already lost so much, my health, my marriage, my best friend. What else could possibly go wrong? Then, the doctor walked in. His face was calm, but serious. "Jason," he began, sitting down across from me. "We need to talk about your condition." I braced myself for the worst, expecting him to tell me the cancer had spread or that I didn't have long left. But his next words completely blindsided me. "Your latest tests show something we didn't expect. Your cancer, it's not as advanced as we initially thought. In fact, with a more aggressive treatment plan, there's a real chance we can put it into remission." I stared at him, speechless. Remission? After months of preparing myself for the worst, after losing Emily because I thought I was dying, and now he was telling me I might live? My mind raced, struggling to make sense of it all. What does that mean?" I stammered. "How did this happen?" The doctor explained that there had been some miscommunication with my previous tests, that the aggressive nature of my symptoms didn't line up with the actual progression of the disease. It didn't make sense, but in that moment, I didn't care. All I heard was that I might not die, at least not as soon as I had feared. I was overwhelmed. The relief, the confusion, the anger at the thought of what this could have meant for Emily and me if we had known earlier. But there was also hope, a tiny spark I hadn't felt in months. I might actually survive this. Word spread quickly. Ryan must have told a few people, and before I knew it, Emily had found out about my potential remission. I wasn't expecting her to care. We hadn't spoken since the day I told her about the divorce. But less than 24 hours after my conversation with the doctor, she showed up at the hospital. I was still processing the news myself when I saw her walk through the door. At first, I thought maybe she was here out of some sense of guilt, a last attempt at decency. But when I saw the look in her eyes, I knew there was more to it. "Jason," she started, her voice softer than I'd heard in weeks. I heard the news. The doctors said you might get better." That's incredible." I didn't respond at first. What was there to say? She was right, it was incredible. But that didn't erase everything she'd done. Emily walked closer to the bed, wringing her hands nervously. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting down at the foot of the bed. "About us. About everything. I was so overwhelmed when we found out about your diagnosis. I made mistakes, Jason. Huge mistakes. But now that you're getting better, maybe we can try again. Her words hit me like a cold slap. Now that I'm getting better. Was that what it took for her to suddenly care? Anger welled up inside me, but I bit my tongue, waiting to see what she was really getting at. We still have a life together, she continued, her voice growing more emotional. The kids, our home. I know I messed up, but I want to make it right. I want to fix things between us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fix things. I said, my voice low. You want to fix things now, after everything? After cheating with my best friend while I was dying? Emily flinched, but she didn't back down. I know I hurt you, Jason. But it was all so hard. I didn't know how to handle it. But now that you're getting better, we can move forward. We can start fresh. I shook my head, disbelief flooding my system. You're unbelievable, Emily. You think just because my cancer might go into remission, we can pretend like none of this happened? I'm not saying that, she said quickly. I know we have a lot to work through. But Jason, I love you. I always have. We can fix this. For us. For the kids. Her eyes were wide, desperate, like she was trying to convince both of us. But I wasn't buying it. I've already filed for divorce, Emily. It's over. She froze at that, her face going pale. For a moment, it seemed like she might give up. But then, something shifted in her expression. Her eyes brightened with sudden determination, and she dropped the bombshell. Jason, wait. There's something I haven't told you. Her voice shook a little as she reached for my hand. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like poison. Pregnant? After everything? My mind raced. How? We hadn't been intimate in months, and I knew damn well about her and Tom. My blood ran cold. I pulled my hand away, staring at her. Are you seriously standing here, lying to my face right now? I'm not lying, she insisted, her voice rising. I found out last week. I didn't want to tell you because of everything that's happened, but now it changes things, doesn't it? I couldn't believe the audacity. This was her play. A pregnancy to reel me back in. Whose is it, Emily? Mine or Tom's? I asked bluntly, knowing full well what the answer would be. She flinched again, but held her ground. It's yours, Jason. I swear. I haven't seen Tom in weeks. This is our chance to start over, to rebuild everything. But I saw right through her. The panic, the desperation, it was all too clear. She didn't want to lose the life we had built. The security. The image. And now that I wasn't dying, she wanted to come back, pretending like we could fix this with one convenient lie. I stood up from the hospital bed, my legs shaking from both the illness and the sheer weight of everything. Get out, Emily, I said, my voice ice cold. I'm not falling for this. We're done. She started crying, pleading with me. Jason, please. You have to believe me. This baby, it changes everything. But it didn't. It was too late. Whatever connection we had was gone, buried under the weight of betrayal and lies. I turned my back on her, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't care anymore. She left, her sobs echoing down the hallway. And as I stood there, alone in that hospital room, I felt an odd sense of closure. This was the final nail in the coffin. Emily's desperate lie only solidified what I already knew. There was no going back. After Emily left the hospital, I sat there for a long time, staring at the door she'd just walked out of. The weight of her lie hung in the air, but I felt strangely calm. She had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, using the idea of a child to manipulate me into staying. It was cruel, but it was also the last straw. I knew now, without any doubt, that there was no fixing this. Not that I hadn't already accepted it, but Emily's desperation had made one thing clear: she wasn't interested in rebuilding our marriage because she loved me. She was doing it out of fear. Fear of losing the life we'd built, fear of being alone now that I wasn't going to die. I should have been angry, and I was, but more than anything, I felt free. I'd spent the past few months believing that I had no future, that everything was spiraling beyond my control. But now, with my health improving and Emily's manipulations laid bare, I realized that I had a chance to start over, on my terms. Ryan visited later that day, and I told him everything, about Emily's ridiculous lie, about the divorce, and about how I was finally ready to move on. He sat there, nodding, his face a mix of anger and relief. "Man, I can't believe she'd pull that crap," Ryan said, shaking his head. "A fake pregnancy? Really? She's desperate." "She is," I agreed. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done. I'll never trust her again." Ryan leaned back, taking a deep breath. "So what's next? I mean, with the divorce, with everything. You've got a second chance now, Jason. What do you want to do with it?" It was a good question. For months, I had lived in this fog of hopelessness, convinced that my life was slipping through my fingers. But now, for the first time in a long while, I could see a path forward. I wasn't sure what it looked like yet, but I knew it didn't involve clinging to the wreckage of my marriage. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know it starts with me. I have to focus on getting better, on the kids, on rebuilding something real. I can't waste any more time chasing what's broken." Ryan smiled. "That's the right call. You've been through hell, but you've got a lot of life left to live. Don't let her drag you down anymore." We sat in silence for a bit, the weight of everything slowly starting to lift. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but so was something else: hope. Later that night, I spoke with my therapist again. I told her everything, about Emily's pregnancy lie, about how I was finally ready to let go, and about the strange relief that came with it. She listened patiently, as always, and asked me the hard questions I needed to hear. "Do you think this is the end of Emily trying to come back?" she asked gently. I paused, considering the question. "No," I admitted. "She'll probably try again. She's not the type to just walk away. But you're ready to keep moving forward, regardless of what she does?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah. I am. I can't go back, not after everything. I have to choose myself now." "That's a big step, Jason," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've been through so much, but recognizing that it's time to prioritize yourself, that's real progress." Hanging up the phone that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Emily would no doubt try again to claw her way back into my life, but I was done letting her have control. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The cancer fight wasn't over, and the divorce would be a messy process. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle it. Because I wasn't doing this for Emily, or even for anyone else, I was doing it for me. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Between hospital visits, lawyer meetings, and trying to keep life somewhat normal for the kids, I barely had time to think. But as chaotic as it all was, it felt like forward movement. The divorce process had officially started, and Emily had backed off, at least for now. I hadn't heard from her since the day she left the hospital. No desperate phone calls, no fake pregnancy updates. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't coming back. Or maybe she was just biding her time, planning her next move. Either way, I was done worrying about it. The focus was on me now, healing, both physically and mentally. The new treatment plan was working, and though the doctors were cautious with their optimism, I could feel the difference. The energy that had been drained out of me for months was slowly returning. I wasn't out of the woods yet, but I was starting to believe I could make it. One day, while I was sitting in the lawyer's office signing paperwork, I realized something: this was the last piece of my old life. Everything I was doing now, everything I was fighting for, was about building a new one. It was a strange feeling, sad, but also freeing. My marriage had been the foundation of everything for so long, but now it was just another chapter that I was closing for good. Once this is filed, we'll be moving toward finalizing the divorce, my lawyer, Susan, said, looking at me over her glasses. Emily will have a chance to contest, but given the circumstances, I doubt she will. I nodded, signing the last page with a sense of finality. I just want it to be over, I said quietly. It will be, Susan reassured me. You're almost there. Leaving the office that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of the past was finally lifting. I was letting go, piece by piece, and it felt good. But I wasn't naive. I knew that healing wasn't a straight path, and that there would be tough days ahead, days where I might miss the life I thought we had, or where the betrayal felt fresh all over again. But I was ready for it. Back at home, the kids were my anchor. They were still too young to fully understand everything that was happening, but I was doing my best to shield them from the chaos. I spent more time with them, making sure they knew that despite everything, they were my priority. Emily still saw them, but our interactions were strictly logistical: drop-offs, pick-ups, the occasional awkward text about schedules. It was a relief, honestly. I didn't have to see her lies play out in real time anymore. One evening, as I was tucking my daughter into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Dad, are you getting better?" The question caught me off guard. For all the appointments and treatments, I hadn't stopped to consider how the kids saw all of this. I sat down on the edge of her bed and took a deep breath. "I am, sweetheart," I said, smiling down at her. "I'm getting stronger every day." She smiled back, that pure, childlike faith in her eyes. "Good. I don't want you to be sick anymore." In that moment, I realized that everything I was fighting for wasn't just for me, it was for them, too. I had to be strong for them, had to show them that even when life knocked you down, you could get back up. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the quiet of the house, reflecting on everything. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, they were still there, but they didn't control me anymore. I had learned to carry them, to accept that they were part of my story, but not the whole of it. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my therapist's number. I sent a quick message, thanking her for helping me through the darkest time of my life. Without her, I might have stayed stuck in that place of bitterness and hopelessness. But now, I was looking ahead. Life wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was steering the ship again. And that was enough. The day the divorce was finalized came quicker than I thought. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No big court battle, no dramatic showdown. Just some signatures, a few legal documents, and a formal end to 17 years of marriage. Emily didn't contest anything. She had faded into the background over the last few weeks, seemingly accepting that her attempts to fix things weren't going to work. When I left the courthouse, I didn't feel relief right away. It wasn't some triumphant moment. Instead, there was a strange emptiness, a lingering question of what now. I went to a coffee shop nearby and sat there for a while, staring out the window. The realization that my marriage was truly over hit me harder than I expected. As much as I'd been ready for this, it was still the end of something that had once been my whole world. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized that it wasn't just the end, it was the beginning of something new. A life without Emily. A life where I wasn't weighed down by betrayal or false hope. A life where I could finally focus on myself, my kids, and what really mattered. I thought back to everything that had happened. Emily's lies, her affair with Tom, the countless sleepless nights, the cancer diagnosis. It all felt like a bad dream, something I had survived but barely. And now, for the first time in months, I could see a way forward. I had my health, against all odds, I was getting better. The cancer wasn't gone, but it wasn't the death sentence I had feared. The new treatment plan was working, and I had a chance at something I thought I'd lost: time. Time to rebuild, time to heal, time to create a new life that was free from the mess I'd been living in. When I got home that evening, the kids were at my parents' place, so the house was quiet. I sat down and thought about everything I'd been through. The therapy sessions, the hospital visits, the endless arguments in my head about what I should have done differently. But it was all behind me now. I wasn't going to let the past control my future anymore. As I sat there, I realized something important: I didn't need to have all the answers right away. I didn't need to know exactly where I was going or what the next steps would be. For now, it was enough to know that I had survived. That I had made it through the worst time in my life, and I was still standing. I picked up the phone and called Ryan, feeling a smile creep onto my face for the first time in what felt like forever. "Hey man, how about that camping trip we've been talking about for years?" I asked. Ryan laughed. "You serious? You finally ready to stop making excuses?" "Yeah," I said, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I think it's time." We spent the next hour making plans, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't tied to the pain of the past. I could see it now, a life that was about more than just surviving. A life that was about living again, on my own terms. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be hard days, moments when the weight of it all would feel like too much. But for the first time, I believed I could handle it. I walked outside, feeling the cool evening air hit my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath. A real breath. One that wasn't filled with fear or anger or doubt. I was free. Not just from Emily or the cancer or the chaos of the past year. I was free to choose what came next. And that, more than anything, was the strength I'd been looking for all along. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new. A new life, a new me, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it.